everyone, welcome back. Shane Combs here on Expanding the Zone. Joined once again this week with my brother Matt. This is show 66, and we're talking student of the game. And we appreciate all of you tuning in, either watching on our YouTube channel or listening out there on the podcast app. Catch us on YouTube at SBC Sports Zone. Thanks to Dr. Chris Good for all the support with the YouTube coverage, and anywhere you find your podcast app out there, it's Expanding the Zone. And again, coming to you here on show 66. And Matt, as I welcome you to the show, I know last week you and I really enjoyed on show 65 talking positionless basketball, and had a lot of different types of feedback. And I wanted to touch on a little bit of that and then transition into this week's topic a little bit more, maybe of the mental side. Last week we were talking how the game has become somewhat of a positionless game in terms of point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center that maybe we ended up growing up in. A little bit more to you have your point guard, and then you just kind of have some guys out there that play some perimeter, maybe a little bit of post or whatnot. And I thought we had a great discussion. And one of the feedback pieces that I wanted to throw at you first that I was getting, and I ended up getting in two or three different directions, but it kind of all met at one topic that I'll summarize. And it was a surprise that some people who said, "Hey, Shane, in listening to you talk the game over the years on podcasting and so forth, or just in coaching against you, or in some cases, one of the people that coaching with me, said I was a little bit surprised that you almost seemed to steer away from positionless, like you weren't totally in love with it. And I've always known you to be a secondary break, a 3-point shooter, a man-to-man defender, that type of coaching philosophy. But it seemed like you were steering away. So I kind of went back and listened to the show, and I guess I kind of understood where they were coming from. I guess, Matt, where I ended last week's show after all the preparation and us discussing it was, I love positionless basketball. I love the ability to put kids in space and for let things go. I just felt like there was a little bit too much freedom of the 3-point shot of people who don't shoot it very well, right? Uh, Too much dribbling of people who don't dribble it very well, and there's not a lot of continuation in offense side to side. You ended up showing some video clips and so forth, and um, what we don't really have the ability. I shouldn't say ability. We don't really have opportunities to set screens, use screens, different things. So much more is done off the dribble. So we don't have a lot of people playing with their back to the basket down in the post. So I think all of those things added up. I guess I understand that some of the feedback I was receiving is probably fair, and it probably was a personal um, look in the mirror type thing for me to just kind of evaluate how I do feel. I feel uh, that there's opportunity to grow as a coach, and that's what you and I love about this show. I guess I wanted to give you a chance to comment on some of that feedback, and maybe any reflection that you had on last week's show.
Well, I got the sense as we talked last week, and what's fun for us on this show, we've said this a million times on here, but just in case somebody's listening for the first time, we purposely try not to like overdo our show prep. I mean, obviously we have to at least talk a little bit, come up with a topic, right, and all that. But we want to have some spontaneous conversation on here, and we want to because we know each other pretty well, right? So there's times where we probably have a pretty good sense of how the other one feels about a certain topic. But it's like when it came to that topic last week, honestly, we were shooting from the hip a little bit, and I don't know if either one of us really going in kind of knew how each other felt about it. I think what I took from your comments in that show, Shane, is that you know I, is that not necessarily that you were against positionless basketball, but I feel like that you still think there's a place for some of the more traditional offensive looks, um, and some of the more traditional offensive, I guess, um, standards and what people used to kind of shoot for versus what they shoot for now. And I think there's probably some truth to that. I think when it comes to basketball, the funny, or probably any sport, but especially basketball, there's new ideas all the time, right? People come up with new ways, new approaches, and some of them are great. but I think everything cycles back sometimes to your basic fundamentals and what there's certain non-negotiables in the game of basketball that you have to be able to do well, right? You just said it. You can try everything you want to try, but you better be able to shoot it. You better be able to handle it. You better be able to pass it. There's certain things you have to be able to do, and I think sometimes, in today's game, like you said, in an effort to get more creative, there's probably some people trying to do things they can't. Um, but so I think it comes back to what we said several times on the show last week. Whatever the plan is, at the end of the day, you have to be able to execute it. You have to have the ability to do it, right? And so that's kind of what I took from last week, is that you and I are open to new ideas and new approaches and all that. But the approach has to fit your talent level, your personnel, what they're capable of doing, and all that.
That's interesting, Matt. Before we jump right into the agenda, maybe one more thought on that follow up. Do you think some coaches fall into the trap sometimes of, man, if I run flex, or if I run shuffle, or if I run motion, or if I run, a base offense that is kind of labeled old school, people aren't going to think I'm creative. They're not going to think I'm doing a good job of putting my athletes in the correct spot. Do you feel like some coaches, especially young coaches, can fall into that trap? Where I guess what I'm saying is, if you go out and take a job tomorrow and you run an offense, your resume kind of says, well, Matt's going to get him to execute that up, do whatever. Where a young coach may not have that foundation piece. Does that make sense? Do you think sometimes coaches fall into the trap of, daggone, man, if I don't do this, or this, and get kids in space and get them doing this, I'm going to kind of look like I've got a pretty small playbook. Like I'm not creative enough.
Yeah, that's probably a good point, Shane. I think there's probably some truth to that. I think there are times where a coach, wants to wants to be able to show what he knows or whatever. Maybe especially a young coach. I see it in football sometimes too. I know this is a basketball show, but I know in football, I think about it, if as soon as that person comes out and runs, the wing tee, offense, or some kind of offense, that's maybe considered a little bit old school, whatever, and people are like, we ran the ball 45 times at night. I mean, gosh, I want to see some spread. I want to watch, because that's what they see on TV and it's entertaining, right? Well, some of these high school coaches know they're not capable of doing that with their high school football team. And I think same is true in basketball. I think there are coaches who have learned, you know, newer offenses, maybe quote unquote more creative approaches or whatever, but then they want to use those, but what they find out sometimes when they first start coaching is they don't have the talent level to do those things, and or the talent they do have, it that doesn't fit their personnel or whatever. um, and I think the best coaches find out really quickly that at the high school level, you have to adjust almost on a yearly basis, really, your approach to the kids you have. I mentioned that last week. At the high school level, you're not recruiting to fit your style. You're not drafting to fit your style. You have kids that you have to figure out what they're capable of doing year to year to year, and you have some graduate, some new ones come in, and so your style has to be, fluid, right? You have to constantly adapt and evolve your style to fit the kids you have.
Yeah, well, that transitions nicely here on show 66 this week as we're talking student of the game. The first thing I had in the agenda was kind of a question, or a subtitle of asking, is where is the talent level in today's game in comparison to, say, a generation ago, or however many years you want to go back, and where's the IQ? Is one higher or lower? Are they both inconsistent? What give me a thought in terms of a place to start the show this week, in terms of where you're at mentally on the concept of skill level being up and down versus IQ being up and down, and how they come together to form what we want to talk about here.
Well, there's this argument, right, with folks from our generation or even generation before ours, and now of, well, these kids nowadays, the skill level's down, right? They're just not as good about. They're great. They're better athletes. I think anybody with eyes can see that, right? That these kids athletically now are different than what we grew up around, just because of the training methods and whatnot. But yeah, they're better athletes, but they're not as good of players, right? They're not as skilled. And as you know, Shayne, I've always pushed back against that a little bit. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I my experience as a coach and watching kids day in day out of practice, I never really felt that way. I never really felt like kids nowadays just can't shoot the ball or can't handle the ball. I think the skill level is still there. Um, what I but what makes this show interesting tonight, and and why I want to get into some of these topics and hear what you have to think. Um, I feel like just players' understanding of the game is way less today. And I'm not afraid to speak out and say that. I'm not trying to offend any player today. I just think the overall understanding of the game from players today compared to players, you know, uh, say in our generation or before, it's just less. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I certainly don't think kids are just, all of a sudden they're not as smart today. We all know that that's not true, right? It's just that I don't think kids study the game. I don't think kids are students of the game, as you like to use that term. Um, and at the same time, if we're being honest, maybe not all coaches are teaching the mental side of the game, or I guess, sometimes maybe we're caught up in the X's and O's and the game planning, and you're trying to get ready for your next opponent. And are you really taking opportunities to help kids become a student of the game and learn some of the nuances or whatever? I think we're going to get into a few specific details tonight, but just to lead in, Shayne, what I would say is I don't think skill level I don't think there's nearly the discrepancy in skill level is as there is the discrepancy in overall understanding of the game of basketball.
Well, that's an interesting concept. I think you and I agree up to a certain point, and then you and I probably maybe take a different turn in this particular discussion. I've always been pretty consistent on believing that the elite players are growing at an unbelievable pace in today's generation. I don't doubt that. We have some elite talent at the top of some of our rosters, and I think a lot of that has to do with we are excelling um, those particular kids at a much faster rate than we did in our generation. What I mean by that is when you are coming up through as a little league player in today's culture, if you are one of the better players, you are getting the opportunity to jump more into organized basketball and play against some better competition and better formats. A lot of times, I know you spend some time in the little league. I think I've come out and watched some Sunday afternoon little league basketball, and I don't know that there's a whole lot of difference in that than say a junior high game that I would have played in myself 25, 30 years ago, or maybe more than that now. Maybe I'm getting a little older. The But you see what I'm saying? It's more of a where kids are getting an opportunity to play more. They're getting far more opportunity at a younger age to play in the AAU levels than we did. I know a lot of times growing up, it wasn't as common to play in that shy of high school probably. So I think a lot of those elite kids are growing at a crazy level. The fact that I think we can't argue numbers in junior high as a result, numbers in freshman JV level are an all time low. And what I'm seeing is I am not seeing the same talent level in that fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth player, throughout a lot of these rosters. And I think that's where it can really start to ugly up some of the game, especially when I think we feel like we're more positionless than we really are when it comes to the skill set. That's what I was kind of touching on here in the opening tonight. So I think you and I are close on the concept of the skill side. Now, where it goes over into the IQ part that you're talking about is there's no doubt that kids are as smart as ever. I mean, you and I are both in administration, right? We see the curriculum, we see different things of kids in the classroom every single day, and I see kids taking higher levels of ELA, higher levels of math, higher levels of science than our generation ever did at that age, like in the middle school level. So my argument is what's happening on the basketball side is I think we're in a big hurry, in my opinion, at some of the lower levels. It's advancing the elite kid. A lot of other kids just get left behind, or they're having trouble keeping up, and that leads to some of the numbers and some of those different things. So I guess my question to you on the IQ side is where have we failed, for a lack of better term, in our profession in terms of teaching the game. um, I guess I have some ideas on what's happened right around the eighth, ninth, 10th grade level. I would love to just get your take on that in terms of where do you think the breakdown has come on the mental side of the game compared to when you were that age? Say when you were in, think back to when you were in the sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth grade in comparison to kids coming through that pivotal age bracket now.
Well, Shane, I think there's so many different ways to come at this. I guess I'm sitting here trying to organize my thoughts a little bit. I mean, because here's my thing, okay? I hear what you're saying and you've always stayed consistent with that you think the elite players are still the elite players, but you don't see the same talent level around. I think you just said fourth, fifth, sixth guy, right, on a roster, whatever. But where I'd push back on that, okay, is it talent level or is it IQ? Is it understanding the game? Because I think back on a team I played on in high school. Many people know I played on a team that went to the state championship game back in 1991. You did a documentary on your YouTube channel about this team,
People
right?
can watch it right here on this YouTube channel now if
Right.
they go back and look. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 2 hour documentary. People will love it. You ought to go look at it if you haven't. You did a great job on it. But like again, I think about whoever on that team that you would have considered our fifth starter, fourth starter, sixth man, seventh man. You can't convince me that you can't go out right now at the high school level on a 500 basketball team and see a guy that dribbles just as well as those guys dribbled, shot just as well as those guys shot, but aren't as productive of players as those guys were. But that's where it comes back to knowledge of the game. I think about a guy, I'll just say a name. I think about a guy I played with in high school, DB Mullen. Okay. DB Mullen was a starter on that team that I'm talking about. And DB wasn't a great shooter. He was an okay ball handler. He was a solid passer. He wasn't like necessarily lights out at any one part of the game. But you tell me, if I asked you right now, what made DB Mullen a good basketball player, what would it be? Hit me with it.
Just his feel and understanding of the game and everything that needed to happen to win.
Yes, he understood basketball, right? Like he understood parts of the games that kids nowadays don't get. Okay, so we have to ask ourselves the question, why is that, right? I think that's what you're saying. And I think there's a lot of things. One, I don't think kids grow up with unstructured play. I've said this a million times. Like we don't have unstructured basketball now. Like very seldom do I drive through our neighborhood and just see a game of 3-on-3 in the driveway, or do you drive down by City Park and see 5-on-5 all day long? Everything's structured now. Everything's with the high school coach, 4-person workouts, open gyms. Um, it's not just, hey, let's pick teams and play today. Because when you pick teams and play, then you got to figure out how to play, right? Well, how am I going to get open? Well, I'll pass it. Man, if I pass it over here and I cut real hard, I can be open here. You started to figure those things out. And I feel like nowadays there's not much of that. And I think that's the fault of the players of wanting to do other things and not going out and playing basketball. But it's also the fault of coaches because we spoon feed our kids everything at times right now. Like we give them everything they need. Like instead of letting them figure out after they pass where to go, we tell them where to go. You're going to pass, then you go over here. And so now there's this lack of just learning the game and feel for the game. So I think it starts, Shane, at kind of a young age with that. And then I think it carries over then as they get older. Again, either coaches direct their players on every little aspect of the game, or sometimes coaches don't take opportunities to just have those classroom sessions where they discuss things, or film, where they watch and discuss things, right? There's I just see a lot of players right now doing things on the court that I would love just to say, like, what were you thinking right there? What did you see? Do you even understand the situation? Um, so I don't know. I don't know if I'm making sense there. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but I guess that's why I keep going back to I don't feel like there's really this gap. There is this mental gap um, between generations where the kids right now are just really struggling understanding the game.
No, I follow everything you're saying, and I think again that's why I wanted to start there. Is I mentioned that sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth grade where kids can start to break into some of that unstructured time you're talking about, and they're learning the game and they're starting to watch. Are they going and watching high school basketball? Are they going to camps? You know, what I mean, like our generation grew up, especially in that age
Yeah.
group, going to a lot of camps and different, remember we'd go 15 days of summer and we were going to OU and we were going to Blue Chip or some kids going down to Rio Grande or then you had your own high school camp and, you know, there was so much IQ and learning in that aspect. You mentioned again watching the game, watching the high school game, watching the college game, watching the NBA game, all of those factors. The one thing that jumps out to me, I guess, is I feel like we're at an all time high of freshmen playing varsity basketball. And again, I guess that's where I lean back to my, I'm hearing that talent levels as good as it's ever been. Yet we're having more and more young kids accelerate, and that's where I get in this disconnect. You're talking about the DB Mullen example, and you're talking about some of those things. I think what happens, Matt, is we're not developing as a coaching staff. Now, it could be kids quitting because, again, the number's down, but we're not developing those juniors and senior role players in our program. I still think, I still come from a camp that says, man, when I've coached, having some 17, 18-year-old junior seniors is a big, big difference in having some freshmen, sophomores. A kid who's playing in their 70th varsity game, that's a big difference than a kid that's playing in their 10th. You know what I'm saying? So,
Right.
like a lot of times when you talk about IQ, I also come back to experience because kids who allow themselves to go through the program, a lot of that stuff happens. A lot of times I'll have coaches come up to me, and I think some of them are just frustrated, or maybe they're venting. A lot of times when we talk in the coaches circles, we feel like it's a safe place, right? So, we'll say, man, kids just don't know the game, or they just don't watch it. They don't, and and it kind of makes you stop to think a little bit of, well, man, what do we have to do to fix that? Right? That's kind of what you and I are talking about here tonight.
Uh,
I think a big modern day thing I wanted to start with you is film. We the one thing we have an easier time of today than we did when we played is film, right? Remember when we
uh,
wanted to watch film, when we get out of study hall and we go down to the coach's office and you've got the VCR tape and you're fast forward and rewind and try to today's huddle, it's right there for you. And
right.
coaches can put, notes on there for them, or you can come and sometimes you can make scouting clips and you can make all sorts of different things. And, you can sort clips and here's all of the midline problems we had in the game. Here's all the 3-point shots we took. Are they good? So to me, give me some thoughts. I know you love film. Give me some thoughts on film, on where film could really play a huge role in terms of us taking a positive step of fixing some of this IQ stuff that we discuss as coaches.
Well, yeah, you said do kids watch basketball? I don't know. They do watch basketball a lot. So if and we can't do anything about that. I don't think as coaches, we can't say, hey, go home and watch this NBA game. You have to. I just think, let's face it, kids have more options now for entertainment, right? I mean, I think we all agree on that. So there's just other things they can do. So if they're not going to watch basketball like we did, because let's face it, we learned a lot by watching college and coming to school the next day and talking to our buddies. Hey, did you see that game last night? So there's not a lot we can do about kids not watching basketball on their own. So as coaches, I think we have to utilize film and teach kids how to watch film. I don't know how much we teach kids. One thing I started doing this year with my sixth grade basketball team, right, is we started watching film. And I know that may seem a little over the top for sixth grade, but I'm not doing it really. I'm not doing it as an effort to like win sixth grade games. All right. I'm doing it in an effort so when these kids get older, they understand how to watch a film. How do you even look at a film? What are you watching for? Do you just hit play and just watch it like you're watching the game on TV? Are you looking for specifics? So we try to teach that of watching yourself individually, then watching the team action that you're trying to do, and all these things. So we've done a little bit of that, but um, like you said, there's so much of that now at your fingertips. And the one thing most kids of this generation like to do is have their phone in their hand, watch videos, right? Um, they're not going to sit there and watch it for 2 hours because that's not the generation they grew up in. Everything's quick, short clips. TikTok, Twitter, all the things they've always seen are these little quick videos. So as a coach, again, you have to utilize highlight clips. You have to, hey, I need you to watch these 3 plays, right? We've all done those things before. And even in your film sessions, sometimes, you have to have, all the time, you have to have organized clips where you can go from one to the next and hopefully keep their attention for a 15-20 minute film session. But regardless, we have to teach kids to watch film. So yeah, I think that's a great place to start, Shayne, and building some of that basketball IQ we're talking about.
Well, I think it's huge. I had a neat opportunity to go in and talk to some junior high kids and kind of do like a little bit of a film session. And it's funny you said it that way because I would even argue up into the high school level. I've talked to some coaches over the last 2 or 3 years. They'd be like, Shane, I don't do a lot of scouting report. I don't do a lot of film. I mean, goodness, we're getting beat by 25, 30 every night, and we know that we're ready for scouting report. And I guess my argument to that, Matt, is this: if you have that young team and you're trying to bring them along, a lot of times you're going through scouting report and you're going through film, not necessarily because it's going to help you beat a team this Saturday. It's because you're starting to learn a little bit of like, okay, what is a scouting report? What are some of the things that go in it? How can we use it? How can we, so you may get beat by 25 this Saturday, but in that scouting report, you're talking about, hey, this particular girl or this particular guy, he or she's a catch and shoot. We have to close out hard and make them put the ball on the floor. And if we do that, they're averaging 18 points a game and they're hitting like 4 threes a night. Well, can we knock them down to 12 points and maybe only 2 threes because we executed scouting report? Or look at the threes that they made. Hey, do you see how our closeout was this or that? And slowly but surely, you're starting to understand some of the terminology and some of the different things that go into that. The same way with film. When you look at film, can you improve your execution a little bit? Can you improve a particular technique? And if you can do those things slowly but surely, if your program does start to improve over the next year or two, well, now you're ready to not only play at a higher level, you're ready to think the game at a higher level because you've kind of went through those particular things. Does that make sense a little bit? How sometimes I think you and I've talked about it on the show before. People want an all or nothing fix, and they're evaluating some of these things that we're talking about based on, is it going to make us like win tomorrow? When sometimes you've got to look and say, okay, how can I get better today and get better next week and get better next month so that our program can eventually win?
Yeah, it's funny, Shayne. Some of the things that I've seen this year, just watching basketball, some examples of what I feel like are more mental type of mistakes than physical mistakes, right? Which lead me to believe that it's understanding the game is are things I should say that can really be helped by watching film. All right, can be helped by certain practices you can put your teams in as a coach. I mean, I see a lot of things, Shane. Shot selection being one, right? When I see certain shot selection, and I say to myself, I wonder if this kid watches himself like on film, like just back every game and say, okay, I took 9 shots. Let's watch these 9 shots. And let's grade. But does he even know how to do that? Does he know how to grade himself? We used to tell our players if if you were watching this shot right here, you were grading yourself as 5 being the best shot in the world and 0 being the worst shot ever taken, where rank that shot right there that you just took. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think sometimes kids need to understand that mindset of how to think about, because how many times you just say or ask, is that a good shot? Well, how the kid may not know if it's a better or good shot all the time, right? Those are things that need to be worked on in practice. Um, Time and score situations. I mean, we can get into specific. I've got some good examples that I've seen this year, but time and score situations, coming out of timeouts, players not executing, you have to start to think what was going on during that timeout. Obviously, the coach explained something that didn't translate into an execution. So, you know, all these things, I think these mental parts of the game, I think, kind of go into what we're talking about tonight.
Well, I think there's something from a teaching standpoint that really goes over into coaching that we talk about. When I remember being a young teacher, and a lot of times I'd have a great lesson, I'd go in and I would go so much faster, or I would go more of a summary than a detailed approach. And it might be a great lesson, but I would teach and it'd be like a 32-minute lesson. I'd look up the clock and there'd be like 18 minutes left, right? And you're like, now what?
Right.
And if you've ever been around 25 middle school students, 18 minutes of free time is not a good idea. So like I think there's a lot of that in coaching too. What I've noticed, Matt, sometimes if I was teaching a closeout drill, 20 years ago, I may teach a good technique, but I may teach it so fast and I may summarize some of the different things to where it might have been a 3, 4, 5 minute drill and it wasn't really where now I find myself breaking it down to the point where I can teach a 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-minute closeout drill to where it's more specific and kids better understand it. I guess my point is it's that whole thing. You got to know it to teach it. And what you're saying is if kids can learn to evaluate it, if kids can get to the point where they can turn the film on it and they become you the coach, right? It kind of and say,
Right.
look, well, we should have been here. This person should have been midline, and when we helped from here, we should have dropped on the backside. And if they're starting to have that terminology, that's a little bit of where that IQ comes from. So I love what you're saying there, and I think film's a big deal. I think film's available to us, especially as kids start to get older. And I love the idea of just exposing the kids to that because anyone who says, "Well, that's a little young to be watching film," to me that went out the window about 10 years ago. I mean, we've accelerated sports a lot, so I don't think there's anything wrong with it accelerating a little bit of the way we go about teaching the game. So I love that. Next to my
And
notes.
Shane,
Yeah,
let me say one thing, Shane. And you just talked about, you just used an example of a defensive drill, right? A closeout drill. And it got me thinking, like, we have drills for skills, right? We have drills that we want to do to teach certain skills. And every coach in America has them. I
sure.
mean, you can go to every coach in America and say, hey, do you ever run a rebound drill? Oh, yeah. We have this rebounding drill, this rebounding drill. What's your defense drill? We have this, and this, right? But I wonder how much sometimes, because I know that I probably failed in this area when I was a younger coach for sure, and then I started to realize the usefulness of it later on. But like, do we do enough practice stuff with the mental side of the game, like on the court at practice? Do we mix in, as coaches? Do we mix in enough drills for mental side of the game? For instance, time and score. Okay, let's talk time and score for a second, right? If you know, almost every game I've watched this year, at some point in the game, one of the coaches will signal for one shot or want to hold for the last shot of a quarter. And some coaches have a play, they'll say they'll call something, they'll call a play, and what they're calling is whatever their uh term is for holding for one shot, like motion one or 5 out one or whatever, they're holding for one shot. And then more times than not this year, I've seen a lot of mess ups in this area where shots are taken way too early, bad decisions are made. But I guess I asked this question, Shane. Do you think that's getting practiced enough? Like with all the game planning for the next opponent, right? putting in your offenses, defenses, trying to fine tune those, are we missing out on time? Like we talked last week about the more creative offenses people are running, whatever. Are we missing out? Are we leaving out our time slots for like time and score situational stuff, right? Um, you know, just basically the mental side of the game, I guess, in practice. You know, are we practicing those situations where we're holding for one shot? Are we practicing those situations where we're coming out of a timeout? Right. I saw this the other day. I'll just use this example. It was one of our Uniota games. I'm not going to name the opponent, but it was our opponent and a very, very good coach from one of the opposing schools that we played a few games ago. So there was a timeout. He explained what he wanted to do. In this timeout, they come out. They don't do what he wanted to do because I could tell by his reaction of like he asked his assistant coach, like, where's he going? So then he takes this kid out. Now, this kid, in my mind, is probably their best player, takes this kid out. And on the way over, he says, Johnny or whatever the kid's name was, I don't remember, what were you to during the timeout? We just went over this, and the kid was kind of like, I don't, but think about this in practice. Do we ever pull kids over? Do we ever pull to the bench and say, okay, let's practice a timeout? I'm going to draw up a play. I want to see if we can go out and execute this play. I don't know. I think sometimes we're all guilty as coaches of, I've got an hour and a half practice. I've got to fit all this stuff in. Now, I'll push that off. That's not as important, or I'll wait till later on that. You know what I'm saying? And if we're not careful, do you think that the stuff that cut out, it's almost like a movie that gets edited, right? Is the stuff that gets edited out of your practice plan the mental side of the game? You know what I mean? If that makes sense, we're leaving that out and working maybe all on the physical and none on the.
Well, there's no question. I think it's a situation where, I've heard coaches say before, I want to film my huddle. You know what I mean? Or like I want to film a practice session. I want to film this or that because it's exactly what you're talking about. We want to we want to practice those different transitions. We want to practice listening. We want to practice giving it back. Some of it's us looking in the mirror. Am I explaining it properly? Am I explaining it in enough detail? If I'm sitting and I have 20 seconds and I'm getting straight to the point of here's exactly what I want. Here's one thing that I ended up watching myself in a game earlier this week. It was in the Adena Huntington girls basketball game, which here in our league was Huntington with a chance to move into second place with a really, really good Adena team. And Adena was coming out of the huddle, and Adena's a team I know real well from coaching in the league so much. I had a pretty good idea. But here's what I loved what Adena ended up doing, Matt. They came out again in their base offense and ran a set for their best player off of a wrinkle that's within their system. And I wanted to get your take on that. I think sometimes when you're sitting in a huddle, are you drawing up something completely brand new and are you trying to reinvent the wheel, or are you going back to something that you have practiced before and here's exactly what we want to do? Well, those Adena girls had ended up coming out in this particular possession I'm thinking about. They ended up missing the shot, but they executed absolutely perfectly. But again, so many of those kids have been running that base offense since they were in the seventh grade, right? So by the time they're now in junior, senior, the base offense is easy concept. They came out and executed perfectly off of the wrinkle that they ended up running to get their best player a shot. And I got to thinking about that. Man, that was really well designed by the coach. That was really well executed by the kids. But don't you think sometimes we come over there at the end of the game and we're going to design a brand new play, right? It's one of those things, and that kind of goes back to what you're talking about in practice. There's so many IQ things where I'll sit in the stands and someone would say, well, what would you do this here? Would you do this here? Would you do this here? And a lot of times my answer to them is, well, it depends if I practiced it, right? It depends if we've talked about that. Well, I guess the first one that comes to mind is like the 3 point at the end of the game, right? Up three, do you foul or not? Well, I guess a lot of times my answer is, well, what have I practiced? What have we talked about in practice? What have we drilled? Do you find yourself sometimes in the most pressurized situations, if you're able to go to what it is you already do and what you've already practiced, that a lot of those things kind of clean themselves up, especially in those most pressurized moments?
Yeah, I think so. I think some coaches, and I've done this before, and I haven't done it before, but I've went back and forth on it to an extent. But I know there are some coaches who believe in you have a special. I'm using quotation marks here, but like a special play that you practice a couple times a week, and this is going to be our end of the game play. If we're faced with a situation, end of the game, we have to have a bucket. We're going to run this play. That way, nobody's seen it. You know what I mean? We haven't ran it all game. We're only going to run into this situation. I see some usefulness in that because then there's some familiarity when you get in that huddle pressure situation, right? And maybe your kids' minds are on the pressure and not what you're saying. So you go to something you've already worked on before. But I do think in a basketball game, Shane, there's going to be times where you have to adjust on the fly too. And you have to be able to tell a player, hey, here's something I see out there that I wasn't expecting. So we're going to try this. Make sure you defend this kid this way, or we're going to,
Hmm.
hey, on this inbounds pass, we're going to trap the first pass or whatever. And if kids aren't listening in that huddle, right? If we're not teaching them how to handle those situations, sometimes things get lost. It all it all kind of goes back to that trying to increase um, your player's IQ. It's like time and score, Shane, and we just talked a little bit about this time and score stuff, right? Well, I don't know about you, but one thing I've seen this year, I feel like, and not just this year, but maybe I'm just paying a little more attention to it. But one thing I've noticed is um, kids start their action or take the shot way too early most of the time. Like if I saw 100 time and score situations, 75% of the time the shot's being taken too early. Very seldom am I seeing situations where the clock runs out and they don't get a shot because they're just being too patient. It's typically, either a player doesn't think and just goes too early and starts the play, or they panic and I think sometimes kids, again, this goes back to, are we practicing these things and just increase the IQ? Kids don't have a sense for how long 5 seconds is, 7 seconds is, right?
Hmm.
I saw a kid the other night start a set that the coach had called at the end of a quarter, and he starts it with about 11 or 12, takes the shot at 7. Well, now the ball goes the other way. A team gets a shot and a tip in chance. You know what I mean? That's how early he took the shot. A kid goes the length of the court, shoots, and has a tip in possibility in the time that wasn't even supposed to be there for it, right? I mean, you were
Hmm.
supposed to wait. And I go back, people will remember this. You remember the state tournament, Humpty Hitchens dribbles down, hits Ray Chambers for the state championship layup. Remember that? Chillicothe
Oh yeah,
back in
yeah.
whenever that was, 08, 09, whatever. And imagine if Humpty Hitchens wouldn't have had a clock in his head and he just pulls up and shoots a runner from 15 feet. You know what I mean? What's the percentages of that going in as opposed to the layup he gave his big guy? All because he knew exactly how much time he had and he used every last bit of it. I'll see kids, Shane, you know, get an inbounds pass with 4 seconds, take two dribbles and jack it from half court, and the ball will hit the rim, come off the rim, and sometimes hit the floor before the buzzer sounds. You know what I mean? And it's just
Hmm.
under, again, I'm just using that as an example as a basketball IQ. But here's the thing, are we practicing those situations? Are we putting 8 seconds on the clock at least once or twice a week and say, okay, side out of bounds, 8 seconds. What are we going to do in this situation? Full court with 3.5 seconds to go, full court. We're down two. What are we doing? Those situations have to be practiced, I think, not only just so kids have some comfort, some familiarity in those situations, but that they start to think the game a little bit. They start to understand, okay, well, here's what we can do in this situation. Um, I don't know. I just feel like as creative as the game has got, I don't know that our kids mentally have gotten creative because I think they've been kind of told, here's what we're going to do, instead of having to figure some of that out on their own.
You make some great points, and I was jotting a couple notes down there as you were talking. There's 3 points I want to make. One, when we're talking about did we practice it or whatever, not there's no way you're going to practice every single situation. I
No,
get
no,
that. We've all
no,
been there,
not every
right? So
right.
so so what I would say is when those things happen, that is where the film session. So there's a practice, there's a game, and there's a film reflection, right? So every now and then you're just going to come across some things in the game of, man, daggone, we haven't really been over exactly that situation there, or a lot of times really good teams. It's funny, they'll be like 13-0, and then all of a sudden they'll be down in the final 30 seconds, and I'm like, they don't know what to do. You know what I mean? It's like they've never been there before. They don't know how to extend the game. They don't know how to foul. They don't know how to do this.
Right.
And so a lot of times it's situations of, or teams that get beat a lot. All of a sudden they'll get in a dog fight and they don't quite know how to execute down the stretch. Well, so my point is, okay, you have a practice situation, you have a game, and then you have a film reflection. So if that happens in a game, take it to the film room, then bring it back to the practice and continue that cycle as you go. And I think that's really important. The other thing, as you were talking there, Matt, it started to make me think about the frustrated coaches say, man, my kids just don't know the game. They didn't have the IQ for that situation. Well, a lot of times you don't have to have all 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people on the roster know a situation. Are you working with your point guard? It goes back to what I said last week. I see the game so much through the point guard. So many times, if you just have that floor general that understands it with you or for you, that particular point guard will solve a lot. Have you executed in practice that quick hitter to where hey, if I call this 1-4 high set, it takes about 8 or 9 seconds for us to get to our first, second, third option somewhere in there. We may want to start it right around 11, right? Where if we run this particular set, it's just kind of a too high. We just come off there and the point guard's going to make it pretty. We may not want to start that more to the 8 or 9. So that those things aren't happening. You're not going at 18 and the ball's going the other way with 7, 8 seconds on the clock still. So I would say it's a stair step of practice, game, and film reflection, and that process is over and over and over. And as the year goes on, and as their career goes on, you can teach a lot of basketball. You can cover a lot of basketball, and then also having that understanding with your point guard and with your floor general. I assume a football coach. I assume I've never coached football myself. I assume a football offensive coordinator would tell you, hey, I need a lot more meeting time with my quarterback than I do my backup wide receiver. You see what I'm saying? Like it's one of those where my backup wide receiver won't know every single thing come Friday night, but I really need my quarterback to. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's one of the. Does that make sense to you in terms
Yeah.
of that connection between head coach and point guard can sometimes cover up a lot of those things that maybe that freshman off guard didn't know in that particular situation.
Yeah, no, I think so, and I think that's where the experience comes in too, probably at that position for sure. It's somewhat fair to maybe compare basketball IQ of a kid who's had 80 games under their belt, right, or 70 games under their belt. I think a kid who's in his first year or her first year, even though they may be very talented. I mean, we see on the girls' side, right, that a freshman can be every bit as good as a senior, right? We see impact freshmen in the girls level all the time. Um, but even then, as talented as they are, I would argue that mentally they're going to be better 3 years from now, just having the games under their belt, right? So I think the experience helps a great deal, especially at that point guard position you're talking about there. But I think as a coach, yeah, I definitely see what you mean. I mean, it's something you may not be able to get all 12 of your basketball players on your roster to understand the offense, you know, backwards and forwards, but you're hoping a couple of your kids do. One of those maybe being your point guard, or one of your being more of your one of your more experienced leaders, whatnot. I think my point, I guess, is when I started thinking about I've put more thought into this while I've been coaching these younger kids, right? These sixth grade kids, because I only practice like twice a week, Shayne, right? So like at the varsity level, you're practicing every day. And now all of a sudden, I'm coaching sixth graders. I'm practicing 2 times a week at most, and sometimes for like an hour and 15, hour and a half, whatever. And I thought to myself, well, what do I accomplish with this, right? So obviously you want to do skill development and those types of things, and obviously you want to have some structure. You want to be able to go out there and run an out of bounds play, just to have some organization. So you work on a few of these things. Obviously, you're not going to have a real thick playbook at this age, right? But the one thing too that I've tried to put some time in are these little mental areas of the game, whether it's running some drills where, hey, we're going to take 20 minutes here and I'm going to call this group of 5 over like it's a timeout, sum up, go do it. And to see if you can figure out how to listen and process information quickly and just kind of see where we're at, right? Uh, I don't know. I think sometimes if we're not careful, we put the mental side of the game last. In our practice planning,
Mhm.
you hear about running a drill, and running a closeout drill that takes 10 minutes, 11 minutes. Well, so if a coach says, hey, I'm going to take a half hour and work on my defense tonight, then I'm going to take a half hour and work on offense, then we'll take a half hour and work on skill development, and then we're going to do some game planning. And all of a sudden it's like, you know, maybe I don't have time to work on situations tonight. But I would argue, think about basketball is always a game of situations. That's what the whole thing is. The whole game's a game of situations. And we want our kids to have the basketball IQ to handle those situations, but are we putting enough time and energy into teaching that stuff?
Yeah, that's good stuff because, we talk about skill development over and over and over, and we talk about reps. How do you become a better three-point shooter? Well, you get in the gym in the summer. You're the first to arrive at practice. You're one of the last to leave, and you get extra shots up, right? I bet most 85, 90% free throw shooters shoot an awful lot of free throws throughout their off season, or like I said, before practice, after practice, whatever. I would venture to say for every shot they take in the game, they probably have a 10 to 1 or a 20 to 1, rep in the off season to the rep in the game. And I don't know that's matched up. Well, I know it hasn't matched up mentally. I would argue in a 2 hour practice session, if you would allow yourself just a half hour a week of film and a half hour a week of scout, and that scout can look a lot of different ways depending on where your development is. I promise you the IQ would go up. My last coaching gig, I coached on the defensive side, and I'm telling you, in a 3 to 4 year period, when you look at 80 film sessions or 80 scouting reports over a 4 year sample, I can promise you the last 2 years were done at a lot higher level than the first 2 years, right? I mean, and
Right.
those kids continue to develop in the game. And then what was neat is I would start to get I would start to get texts from the kids. Hey, I was watching this film so and so. Well, I'd be guarding this person. It looked like this probably be my matchup. I noticed this, and before you know it, the kids start to take ownership of it, and they're starting to watch. So I just think there's some things we can do on the mental side. So when I say student of the game, I understand that everyone's not going to love it as much as us, but if you do have the opportunity when they come to basketball practice to incorporate some of those things. So, well, Matt, that kind of marks off everything on my list. I guess I would ask you, when you go into closing thoughts, if you think back to positionless basketball last week, and we talked so much about the actual skill set of a player. This week we've talked so much more about the mental approach of coaches developing players. Give us kind of a closing summary here that can cap this off for us.
Yeah, I guess the best way I could give you my closing thoughts, Shayne, and just sort of like a nutshell here is this. We I think the game of basketball has become, because we've gotten more creative. We talked positionless last week, right? If we're not careful, we've taken a relatively simple game, right? Of here's what the idea is. We're going to try to put the ball in the basket. We're going to try to stop the other team from the ball in the basket, right? We take this simple idea and we make it really, really complex through all these different ideas we have. And listen, I'm one that loves the creativity. I'm all for it. I said last week I've enjoyed kind of where the game has went nowadays, right? But I think sometimes too, if we're not careful, we complicate it and we forget to really help our kids understand just sort of the basic approach to it. You and I played for a guy, Shayne, and I think it was the generation of coaches that he was in at the time, because I don't think he was the only one like us, who who probably wouldn't be considered by today's standards like an X and O guru. Okay. I mean, we didn't have a whole bunch of out of bounds plays, or we didn't have a whole bunch of offenses. We had a couple, continuities against zone man, a couple out of bounds unders, a side out of bounds, right? We didn't have, but the one thing that our coach did, and I think a lot of coaches in his generation did, was they really taught their players to think the game. They taught their players to work through things like to read the defense. And I mean, I can still remember, I can still remember during a game looking at a teammate. I mean, Jeff Miller, who's the girls coach at Uniota, right? I can remember him looking at me and saying, hey, you see how that guy's guarding you over there? When you throw me the ball, act like you're going that way, cut this way. You should be open down here on the block. We'd be talking about it during like a free throw. And I think a lot of that credit, though, went to our coach, Coach Lovely, who put us in those situations where we had to figure it out. Put us in those situations where we had to work through those things and sort of learn how to play the game. It's almost like instead of teaching us an offense, he taught us how to play offense. And there's a difference in that. Instead of teaching us just a certain trick on defense, he just taught us how to play defense. And then so because of that, we just had a little bit better understanding. I don't necessarily blame our kids today, truthfully. I think I kind of blame the whole basketball system to an extent of how we've handled things as coaches. You've talked about youth programs on up through, things have changed, right? But the fact of the matter is, and I would argue it against anybody, and this will be my closing thought, Shayne, the kids today do not have the same level of understanding of the game of basketball that we had growing up, and that concerns me a little bit, because when I talk to high school kids, I purposely like to talk to high school kids and talk to them about their games, and they don't have the understanding uh, of previous generations, and I think that's on all of us. It's on them because they don't watch basketball as much and they don't immerse themselves in it, but it's also on us as coaches that we haven't found ways to help them along in that area too. And I think that's an area that needs to improve, because I will stand by what I said. I do not believe skill level is down. I don't. I believe athleticism is through the roof. I believe that skill level is close to the same, but I believe that the understanding of the game is lower.
Well, that's really good. That's really well said. I think in my closing thoughts, and as I'm listening to yours, I always believe in education, and I've been in a small school my whole career, so I've watched people wear a lot of different hats. Okay, so like in a small school, you're not just the secretary. You're probably part nurse, probably part guidance counselor, part
Right.
whatever, and that's just the way it is, and we all rally together to make it work. You don't think anything of it. Well, the same is true in coaching, and what I have found is what we want to be important, we end up making it important, and it is important. And I've watched that cycle over and over and over in my career. So this is where I would challenge coaches on this. We live in a day where athletes are bigger, faster, and stronger. Well, more and more basketball teams have made time in their schedule for weightlifting. More and more kids go to AP prep. More and more kids work on being a better athlete. More and more kids, especially your elite kids, will get into some individual skill work. I'm watching kids at a I'm watching some of the better players at the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade that trying to Euro step and do some different high level things and some different things and handle the ball. Again, I see that, but and I see a lot of X's and O's, which I know is not the easiest thing. So when I see kids executing X's and O's, that tells me, man, there's some time spent on that. You don't just do that. I mean, you don't just throw five eighth graders out there and run four quick hitters in the last four possessions. So there's some time. So I guess the challenge would be make the IQ part important. You know, don't fall on the excuse of, man, my kids just don't watch the game. They just don't know the game. Well, let's help them. You know what I mean? I run into the same thing as a baseball coach. I have a lot of kids that grew up playing some little league baseball, and then they come out and now all of a sudden they're three sport athletes. Football and basketball have kind of started to rule, and they're going to come out in the spring play some baseball, right? Well, they may not have the great feel for the game, but can we learn the game each and every day a little bit more? So I guess that would be the challenge: is make it important, make it a priority, find a way, not just in the teaching on the floor, but even through the classroom, through the terminology, through the film. Use the technology advantage that was not there, years and years ago. It's right there at your fingertips, and I think what you'll find is you'll find a true benefit in the way your kids grow and the way your kids go. You know, you don't have to have six, seven, eight kids that play AAU all year round. Now, if you do, that's great. You know what I mean? But if you have that, there's a good chance you probably had some of them move into your school or do whatever. And in the reality, you may not have seven, eight, or you may have one, two, or three of them. And that's awesome. You know what I mean? But but again, grow all of your kids in that IQ sense in terms of the way you use the classroom and the way you use the film. So, Matt, I think that's a lot of fun. I think we've done a thorough job of taking the skill part of it on the positionless, using the student of the game. This week, I do want to remind people. Checks out SVC Sports Zone on YouTube. If you're out there listening on the podcast app, can't thank Dr. Chris Good enough for his support there. If you're watching us on YouTube each and every week, we appreciate that. Don't forget that you can also find us wherever you get your podcast out there on the app. Expanding the Zone is what you want to look for there. So, Matt, a lot of fun. Show 66 in the books. Boy, certainly have some more basketball to go, and encourage people to continue to listen. And so, on that note, we'll get on out of here this week, and hope to be back here soon with some more basketball talk. Thanks, everyone.